The German company Henschel & Son, founded in the previous century, did not engage in aircraft production until the early 1930s. This enterprise was a world leader in locomotive manufacturing and also produced passenger cars, buses, trucks, and spare parts for them at its plants in Kassel. Henschel was one of the first firms to begin developing diesel locomotives. Seeking to expand its product range, the company's management, headed by Oskar Henschel, had been negotiating since 1931 to purchase the completely bankrupt Junkers Flugzeugwerke. In February 1932, Henschel made the decision to establish its own aircraft production. On March 30, 1933, 2 months after Hitler came to power, the Henschel Flugzeugwerke branch was opened, renting workshops of the Ambi-Bud carriage building plant near Berlin. The chief engineer of the new enterprise became Erich Koch, and the design bureau was headed by Friedrich Nikolaus, who had transferred from the Hirth firm. The staff numbered 68 employees. Despite the scale at which the might of the German Air Force was being restored, Henschel did not receive state support immediately. Only at the end of 1934 did Göring's Commissariat manage to secure an order for licensed production of the Junkers medium bomber. Series production began in December 1935 at the new plant in Schönefeld, followed by Dornier bombers. Meanwhile, Henschel built its first aircraft of original design. This machine was a light trainer aircraft, but when armed it could also serve as a fighter. In its construction, one could see the influence of the Polish engineer Zygmunt Puławski, creator of fighter aircraft. Flight tests conducted from January 4, 1934 by engineer Schubel revealed instability and sluggish response to the controls. Although Nikolaus urgently redesigned the second prototype, the competition was won by another fighter, the Focke-Wulf Stösser. Following the first aircraft, in 1935 came the next machine, a prototype of a successful multi-purpose aircraft. But the first true success of Friedrich Nikolaus's design bureau was the Henschel dive bomber. The reborn Luftwaffe lacked dive bombers. Since the days of the First World War, German air warfare theorists had been developing the idea of massive battlefield strike aircraft use. The German Air Ministry, organized on May 15, 1933, while awaiting the latest Junkers, ordered transitional dive bomber models on a competitive basis from Henschel and Fieseler. Work did not begin from scratch. Apart from Junkers, which had never ceased working on dive bombers since 1918, Heinkel had also been developing this type of combat aircraft. In 1931, a two-seat biplane capable of dropping bombs weighing up to 1,100 pounds was successfully tested at a secret range in Warnemünde. One of the opponents of adopting such machines was Ernst Udet, who later headed the armaments department of the ministry. In his understanding, a dive bomber was a light, single-seat aircraft that could, if necessary, also act as a fighter. Udet considered the best foreign counterpart to be the American Curtiss Hawk, a small single-seat biplane armed with 2 machine guns and a bomb mounted under the fuselage. Germany purchased 2 of these machines in October 1933. The study of their design and the flight tests conducted personally by Udet influenced the requirements issued to Henschel and Fieseler in February 1934. The experimental aircraft of the competitors appeared almost simultaneously at the beginning of 1935. Unlike Fieseler's 2-seat classical biplane with numerous struts, Henschel's design was a single-seat sesquiplane with clean aerodynamic lines. The prototype's first flight took place on May 8, 1935 in Johannisthal. Udet himself sat in the cockpit of his protégé. The aircraft was powered by an air-cooled engine with a maximum output of 725 horsepower at 2050 revolutions per minute, covered by a smooth cowling and fitted with a 3-bladed metal propeller. During the summer, 2 more machines rolled out of the factory. They were distinguished by a smaller diameter cowling with 18 small cutouts, fairings for the cylinder heads. The aircraft carried standard light armament of the period, 2 7.9mm machine guns firing through the propeller. On the third prototype, a 2-bladed Hamilton Standard variable pitch propeller was installed, as would be used on subsequent series production machines. All 3 were sent to the Flight Research Center in Rechlin. Within a month, 2 of them were destroyed in crashes. The aircraft broke apart when pulling out of dives. The attachment points of the central struts could not withstand the loads. This defect was corrected in the 4th prototype, tested in August 1935. On this machine, the wing center section and panels were reinforced, and the stabilizer wire braces were replaced with struts. The aircraft could dive safely at angles up to 80 degrees. The pre-series aircraft were built on the basis of this fourth prototype, with the first of them test-flown in July 1936. The Henschel Hs-123 dive bomber began mass production at the company's plants in the German cities of Johannisthal and Schönefeld, as well as at the AGO plant in Oschersleben. The aircraft was equipped with a powerful BMW engine producing 880 horsepower at takeoff, featuring a direct fuel injection system into the cylinders. The fuselage had an oval cross-section and was entirely metal. In the front section were arranged one behind the other the engine mount, oil cooling radiators, a fireproof bulkhead, a 71-gallon fuel tank, a small compartment for 10 light bombs weighing 22 pounds each, ammunition for the 2 machine guns, and the pilot's cockpit. The synchronized machine guns were mounted just behind the instrument panel and fired through special tubes in the cowling. The upper wing was connected to the fuselage with strong metal struts, and to the lower wing sections with trapezoidal braces. The wing had metal skinning from the nose section to the front spar, and fabric covering was used further back. The stabilizer and fin were fully metal. The framework of the ailerons and control surfaces was covered with fabric. The lower wing with flaps could carry 4 suspension points for 110-pound bombs, or 2 containers with small bombs weighing 4.4 pounds each. Under the fuselage, a 550-pound bomb could be mounted on a special movable lever for release during a dive, or an additional fuel tank could be carried. The non-retractable landing gear had powerful shock absorbers and low-pressure wheels. The main struts and tailwheel were enclosed in fairings. On the sides of the fuselage, special stirrups were mounted to make climbing into the cockpit easier. Production of the Henschel Hs-123 aircraft continued until November 1938. In total, about 260 units were built. Improvements to the main modification took place in parallel with series production. For modernization purposes, several more experimental machines were built. An experimental aircraft with a more powerful 960 horsepower engine and a 3-blade variable pitch propeller, tested in July 1937, became the prototype of an improved version. In August of the same year, it was showcased at the Aviation Exhibition in Zurich. The next experimental model could have led to attack modifications with a sliding cockpit canopy, armor protection, and an additional pair of machine guns. In a similar way, many series aircraft were later upgraded at factories and in combat units. The cockpit sides were reinforced with thin armor protection was added, and the fabric covering of the lower wing surfaces and most of the upper ones was replaced with metal. The last experimental sample was used at the end of 1937 as a flying laboratory for engine testing. The first dive bomber unit in the Luftwaffe was the Schwerin Group, established on October 1, 1935. It included Arado and Henchel aircraft. Within a month, this group was expanded into the Immelmann Squadron, which began to receive the first series-produced Henschel Hs-123s. It is well known that the Luftwaffe used the civil conflict in Spain to train personnel and test equipment, as well as to verify its views on the role of aviation in the coming war. The Douhet Doctrine, which dominated the thinking of most strategists of that era, downplayed the importance of frontline aviation. This view was not shared by Colonel Wolfram von Richthofen, a World War I ace who had already been practicing ground attack aircraft tactics at that time. As Chief of Staff of the Condor Legion, under which Germany supported General Franco's uprising, Richthofen insisted on the urgent deployment of dive bombers to Spain. 5 aircraft delivered to Seville in December 1936 joined an experimental unit composed of prototypes and test versions of the latest combat aircraft. Along with the Henschel Hs-123, Messerschmitts, Heinkels, and Junkers were based at the Tablada airfield. The Henschels, commanded by Lieutenant Heinz Brücker, were officially listed as fighters but were mostly used as attack aircraft. Their combat debut came when they covered Falangist troops in the battle for Malaga. As close support aircraft, the Henschel Hs-123s performed excellently even without radio communication with ground forces. In continuous combat action, the group of 5 Henschels suffered only 2 losses. Republican air defenses shot down Feldwebel Konrad Rücker's aircraft in March 1937 near Salamanca. Another Henschel Hs-123, piloted by Unteroffizier August Wilmsen, was downed over Bilbao in June. The success of the Henschel Hs-123s was due to their survivability, ability to operate from short, improvised fields, and their good combination of speed and maneuverability. A Henschel riddled with holes and with a failing engine could still escape from Republican fighters in a steep dive. The Francoist Air Force ordered a batch of Henschel Hs-123s. Taking into account the two machines transferred by the Condor Legion, Spain received 16 dive bombers in the summer of 1938. The 24th Group, flying the Henschels affectionately nicknamed Angelitos, Little Angels, by the sentimental Spaniards, took part in the last battles of the Civil War near Teruel and Córdoba in January 1939. 12 surviving Henschel Hs-123s remained in service with the Spanish Air Force until 1949. At the same time as the Spanish Francoists, China also showed interest in this aircraft. The government of Chiang Kai-shek purchased 12 machines. Delivered in the summer of 1938, they were assigned to the 15th Bomber Unit. It is known that the Chinese Henschels distinguished themselves in early 1939 during the destruction of Japanese crossings in the Yangtze River Delta. Meanwhile, in Germany, dive bomber groups were being re-equipped with more modern Junkers aircraft. In April 1937, the Luftwaffe command decided to keep the Henschels only in two groups. At that time, on Richthofen's initiative, the formation of assault aviation began. From August 1, 1938, 5 groups of close support aircraft were organized. The first of these units flew Henschels. The other 3 had mixed compositions of different aircraft types. However, the high assessment of the combat potential of the Junkers dive bomber led to an order in the fall of 1938 to cease Henschel production. On November 1st, after the occupation of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, the assault groups, with one exception, were disbanded. At the start of World War II, only one combat unit flew Henschels, the instructor group. At the end of August 1939, this unit was moved closer to the Polish border. Among the 897 bombers used during the invasion of Poland, there were 36 Henschels. At dawn, on September 1st, these aircraft carried out the first attack strike. The aircraft operated throughout the entire Polish campaign, demonstrating high effectiveness. The total losses of the Luftwaffe amounted to 285 machines. Among them were over 10% of the Junkers that took part in the battles, and only a few Henschels. The most striking feature of these aircraft was not their armament, consisting of small-caliber machine guns and light bombs, but the psychological effect of the engine roar and the sounds during a dive. The rumble of the engine at low revolutions, indistinguishable by ear from the fire of heavy machine guns, spread panic among the Poles. Diving at a steep angle onto their targets, the Henschels were nearly invulnerable. Moreover, these aircraft could withstand even direct hits from anti-aircraft shells. Thus, the Henschel biplanes remained in Luftwaffe service until the beginning of the battles in the West. By May 10, 1940, the group had 45 combat-ready Henschel aircraft. The unit was part of the corps that cleared the way for the tanks of General Reichenau's 6th Army. On the very first day of combat, the Henschels thwarted the Belgians' attempt to blow up the bridges over the Albert Canal, ensuring its crossing. Later, the unit supported Kleist's group in the advance on Luxembourg and the Ardennes. On May 13th, the Henschel bombers, together with tanks, crushed 2 French divisions defending near Dyle. After this, they took part in the battles near Sedan and Cambrai. Following the signing of the armistice, the group was transferred to be re-equipped with Messerschmitts. Soon after, the unit was deployed in the Balkans and then on the Soviet-German front, where the Henschels once again confirmed their reputation. The outdated biplanes fought on the central and southern fronts as part of groups formed in April and November 1942 from former training Henschels, operating alongside fighter bombers and the latest attack aircraft. Typically, a Henschel carried on external racks 4 bombs of 110 pounds each, or 2 containers with fragmentation munitions or 2 20mm cannons. The Henschels could carry out ground attack missions even when other types of aircraft were stuck on rain-soaked field airstrips. To avoid jamming of the wheels by mud and tufts of grass, the landing gear fairings were usually removed. At the beginning of 1943, only 4 groups of German ground attack aircraft operated on the Eastern Front, organized into 2 squadrons. The new Henschel proved difficult to control and insufficiently reliable. General Richthofen, who commanded the Air Corps, even proposed resuming production of the old Henschels. But the industry then had other concerns: the increase in fighter production. As a result, in the frontline aviation, ground attack and night bomber units continued to operate battle-worn aircraft of outdated types, doomed to suffer heavy losses. By mid-1944, the Henschels serving in one of the groups had been completely destroyed. The Henschel was a single-seat dive bomber of biplane design with mixed construction, powered by a 9-cylinder air-cooled engine. The aircraft's fuselage had an all-metal truss structure with duralumin skin. The transverse frame consisted of 10 main bulkheads and 5 additional ones. The first 2 bulkheads served as fireproof partitions separating the engine, fuel, and oil tanks from the pilot's cockpit. In addition, the engine mount was attached to the first bulkhead. Between the first and second bulkheads, a tested fuel tank was installed. The struts of the upper wing were also attached to these bulkheads. Between the second and third bulkheads, in the upper part of the fuselage, 2 machine guns with ammunition boxes were mounted. The cockpit was located between the 5th and 6th bulkheads. The instrument panel was attached to the 5th bulkhead, and the pilot's seat to the 6th. The pilot's seat had an armored backrest and could be adjusted for height. The main flight and navigation instruments were located on the central instrument panel. The panel itself consisted of a main and an additional lower section. On the left side of the cockpit were the engine control lever and a small control wheel for adjusting the trim tabs of the elevator and rudder. On the right side were mounted the radio control unit and the electrical panel. Footrests and handholds on the fuselage were used for entering the cockpit. The aircraft's upper wing had a strong structure with 2 main spars and consisted of 3 parts, the center section and 2 outer panels. The wing frame was entirely metal. The wing skin was mixed, the front part covered with aluminum sheets and the rear part with fabric. The ailerons occupied half the span of each outer wing panel and were equipped with special trim tabs, adjustable only on the ground. The lower wing had a simpler design with a single main spar, a metal frame, and fabric skin. Each outer section of the lower wing had 14 transverse ribs. The 6th and 7th ribs were reinforced and carried the bomb racks. The main landing gear struts were also attached to the lower wing. Along the trailing edge of the wing, covering half its span, were fabric-covered flaps. The upper and lower wings were connected to each other by only 2 strong profiled struts. The upper wing was attached to the fuselage by 2 additional N-shaped struts. The tail assembly had a standard design without additional bracing. The frame was entirely metal. The vertical and horizontal stabilizers were covered with aluminum sheets, while the rudder and elevators were fabric-covered. The aircraft's horizontal stabilizer could change its angle of incidence from -2 to +2 degrees. The stabilizer angle was adjusted by a special control wheel on the left side of the cockpit. The rudder and elevators were equipped with controllable trim tabs. All control surfaces had special tabs to ease handling. A white navigation light was installed on the rudder. The landing gear had 3 support points with a freely rotating tailwheel enclosed in a light aluminum fairing. The shock absorption of the tailwheel strut was hydraulic. The main landing gear struts were attached to the main spar of the lower wing and the reinforced 3rd rib. For additional strength, each strut had an extra brace. The brakes operated on the shoe principle and were controlled by pedals. The wheels and struts were covered by large fairings. The aircraft was equipped with a 9-cylinder radial carburetor engine with air cooling, the BMW 132A. The engine was mounted on a special frame made of steel tubes and fixed to the first power ring of the fuselage. The engine was covered from above with an aluminum cowling secured by quick-release screws. In the upper part of the cowling were 2 channels for firing the machine guns. All production aircraft had steel 2-bladed propellers with a diameter of about 10 feet, with the blade pitch adjustable only on the ground. The aircraft had a main fuel tank in the fuselage with a capacity of 71 gallons. In the cockpit, there was an emergency valve for fuel drainage and a shutoff valve, which reduced the risk of fire if the aircraft was damaged in battle. An additional fuel tank with a capacity of 34 gallons could be suspended on the central fuselage hardpoint. The engine oil system included an oil tank with a capacity of about 13 gallons installed behind the engine on the first fuselage ring and an oil pump. The radio equipment included a shortwave FUG-7 radio station manufactured by Telefunken, located in the rear fuselage compartment. A wire antenna was stretched between the strut on the upper wing and the vertical stabilizer. The aircraft's armament consisted of 2 synchronized MG-17 machine guns of 7.92 mm caliber, located in the upper fuselage. The machine guns fired between the engine cylinders. The ammunition load of each machine gun was 500 rounds. The rounds were stored in special boxes in the right and left fuselage compartments, closed by quick-release hatches. The bomb armament consisted of 4 110-pound SC-50 high-explosive bombs on underwing racks. In addition, it could carry anti-tank bombs weighing 110 or 154 pounds, or containers with 4-pound SD-2 fragmentation bombs. Each of the 2 containers held 92 bombs. 2 20mm MGFF cannons could also be suspended under the wing. The central fuselage hardpoint could carry bombs weighing up to 551 pounds. Although the Henschel Hs-123 was quickly overshadowed by more modern designs, it carved out a unique place in aviation history. Rugged, reliable, and feared for its psychological impact, this little biplane proved that even an aircraft considered outdated at the time could become a decisive weapon in the right circumstances. Its service across multiple fronts, from Spain to the Eastern Front, ensured that the Hs-123 would be remembered as one of the Luftwaffe's most distinctive and enduring early war machines. Thank you all for watching. See you in new videos.